You're listening to What It's Like with Luce, a podcast highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host Lucy Norris, and on today's episode, I'm sitting down with Irish electronic pop artist and COVID-19 doctor. Born in County Mayo, this week's guest has always had a deep love for music. Beginning with classical piano, he quickly developed an interest in rock and reached for the guitar and drums as soon as he could. Leaving school, he decided to park his musical ambitions and started studying medicine. During his time at university, he rediscovered his talent and became the keyboard player for the popular group Rofi James, a move that would ultimately kickstart his future solo ventures stepping on Lego. Sharing how he balances gigging with hospital shifts and how it's been writing music whilst being on the front line of a global pandemic, here's what it's like to be Conor Waters. Welcome, Conor. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. I think it would be a really good starting point if we could go all the way back and chat a little bit about what it was like for you growing up in Mayo and how music influenced your life back then as a child.
So I started playing piano. I think when I moved to Mayo from Roscommon, and when I moved there when I was like 7, I think I started playing piano. When I went there, so that was kind of the starting point of playing music, I guess. So I started doing like the classical grades on piano, like a lot of kids do, and just kind of worked through them. I think then really when I was a teenager in school, I was actually mad into like rock and like grunge music, which you probably wouldn't think to listen to my music at the moment, but sure. I was mad into like rock and grunge music, so I wanted to learn the guitar and drums. So I did that, and then it was trying to find a way to use the classical piano training in that. So I gradually started playing in bands, I think, or when I was like 16 or so. I think that was probably when I started writing songs too. Like I initially started writing classical pieces on the piano, and then gradually moved to songs. But I think the starting point for writing music and that was probably when I was playing in bands when I was 16 or so.
I think the really interesting thing that came up when I was doing some research on you is that you're actually a doctor. So when it came to choosing what to study, I guess, going forward in life, you chose medicine. So can you tell me a bit about why that was your choice and perhaps not something a bit more down the musical route?
Yeah, it's funny actually, because I never did music in school for some reason.
Okay.
And I remember like when I was in school, like when I was going to Leaving Cert, I was trying to choose my subjects, and I remember it was between music and applied maths, and I for some reason went with applied maths. Like in hindsight, it's kind of funny. Like I never did music in school at all. So I think if I had done that, maybe I might have gone down the music route, because I think because I didn't do that, I always kind of saw it as a hobby and never really fully saw it as something more than that, because I'd never really been doing it in an education from an education point of view. So then I'm not really sure why I chose medicine either, but like when I was in school, it's kind of the only one that really jumped out besides music that has been something I'd enjoy. And I guess because I wasn't doing music in school, so I kind of felt like I wouldn't be able to do music in college, I guess. So that was probably the main reason why I chose medicine over music.
And medicine's one of those subjects, I think, that, well, I don't know for sure, but it seems like it's a very intense thing to study and also a career to choose. So how did you manage to keep incorporating your love for music as a hobby whilst taking on such a demanding course?
Yeah, that has been tricky at times, for definite. I think so. When I went to college initially, I actually stopped playing music for the first 2 or 3 years of college, and then when I was in third year, I'd been trying to kind of get back into it, but hadn't really been. I only get when you quit something like that, it's very hard to actually put yourself out there to make yourself actually go and do it.
Yeah.
So I met a guy back home who was looking for a piano player for like a covers band. So I started doing that and doing a few gigs, and gradually got back into it. But along the way, I've definitely dropped out of it at certain stages because it's become difficult. to keep going. And I think as well, like because I set up the Stefano Lego thing about a year ago, like that was definitely tricky to get up and running off the ground, because there's so much, all of the business side of things that you have to get organized. Like you probably know this yourself, just from your podcast. So just like even like getting your website going and trying to get some fan base, like all of that work that goes into it was definitely very tricky last year.
Yeah.
And that's actually what the new single was essentially about. Because I was doing a lot of exams at the time for America, and I was on a very, very busy job, and it was just quite stressful overall. But I think as well, the worse it gets, the more I try kind of cling on to music a little bit.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things where it probably makes you realize how much more you love it when you do have to specifically set aside the time to make it work.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. I think the busier I get, and the harder I find it to make time for music. It really annoys me when I can't make time for it. So I think then it definitely makes me realize how important it is.
And so when you did graduate from university, I think you studied in Galway.
Yeah.
What were your next steps after that? I guess both, where did your medicine career take you, but then also what steps were you at in terms of incorporating that music side into your life alongside your career?
Yeah. So from a medicine standpoint, I actually stayed in Galway. I worked in the hospital in Galway pretty much since then for the last 4 years, besides the very short stint in America. At the time, I was actually playing in another band called Rofi James in Galway. So I was playing keyboards with them. So that was kind of where my main focus was at the time. I hadn't actually kind of pursued my own project, I guess. But like that was a lot of fun as well. Like we used to get like really good, like we used to do really good gigs. Like a lot of people would come to the shows, so it used to be a lot of fun. I think at that stage it probably wasn't too hard to incorporate it all into the medical life. It was my first year working, and when you after just the first year after you graduate, you kind of you're just working. You don't generally do any exams that year. So my free time was my free time for the first time in a long time, because when you're in college you always feel like you have to be studying. So like there's a little bit of a release there when I started working, just gigging and stuff, and actually been able to enjoy my free time.
And how did you first get involved with Rofi James? Can you tell me a bit more about that experience for you?
Yeah, that goes back a long time. So when I was in college, I think I was in third year in college. I wanted to learn how to sing. I was convinced that I couldn't sing, so I just kind of tried to suss it out to ask a professional if I can or not. But the singer in that band is now my producer. So I think a lot of what I'm doing stem from that. And then Cahill from that band, his cousin, is in Rofi James. So as soon as Spy Food disbanded, I was essentially just directed towards Rofi James, I guess, because they were looking for a keyboard player too. So it was kind of just friends of friends that I knew that got me into them.
You spoke a little bit there about how, you would plan tours. What is tour life like?
It's an interesting one, because whenever I do it, I'm always trying to like balance it with work and stuff. I've done one tour as Stefano Lego before Christmas, and it's great, and it's like a lot of fun. It's extremely tiring for definite. But it's a lot of fun. I think what I used to, when I was doing this before Christmas, like I was doing gigs and then driving home at like 1 or 2 a.m. to be in work for 8 o'clock in the morning, like that kind of thing. Like that was definitely a bit rough. But if you got like that's if you had like midweek gigs, but generally like it's a lot of fun. Like I did one of the Workmen's before Christmas, and that was class. Like, it was so much fun. So I guess my perspective of tour life, as kind of what you imagine it, is a little bit different, because I'm always kind of balancing it with work. I've never done like a full blown, just touring kind of situation. I'd love to try that. I'd say that's good crack.
I'd say it probably has its ups and downs, and it can be quite mental at times, but the stories that must come out of those kind of experiences, I'd say, are crazy. Once your journey, I guess, was finished with Rofi James, what were the next steps? How did you take that turn into more of a producing role? And then also, obviously your journey with stepping on Lego as well. How did that all come to be?
So when I was in Rofi James, I was writing a lot of music at the time, and I wanted to be in a band where I was writing essentially, but it's when you're in bands with a lot of people, that's hard, and especially when you join bands, like people have kind of established their roles, and you can't really just like march in and be like, I'm songwriting now, like that kind of way. Yeah. So I was writing a lot, and I had this idea in my head that I wanted to do this really cinematic pop, electronic pop kind of thing. And it was quite a specific thing. So I think, and I probably was avoiding actually doing it myself out of the pure fear of actually pursuing something like this on your own. But eventually I was kind of just like, the only way that I'm actually going to be able to produce these songs to the way that I want to do them is to go off on my own and do it my way, I guess. Because it was such a specific idea that I couldn't really incorporate into another pop band. From the producing side of it, so the producer that I work with, that does all my mixes and just producing as well, is Dave Skelton, but he was the singer in that first band that I was in, and he would have mentored me a huge amount when I was learning how to produce. And that when I was in SpyFu, that was probably the first time that I did any producing. That was the first time I actually downloaded the software, that kind of thing. So I'd kind of been tipping away at that in the background for a while, and the lovely thing about when you get into producing is that if you have something in your head that you want to get out, if you don't produce, it's very hard to give your idea its full justice, I guess. But if you do produce, you can really lay out exactly what you're going for with a song, and that's what I loved about it. So I properly started getting like a bit of training in it towards the end of my time in Rofi James. I started doing a few kind of production courses and some online education courses to learn a bit more about producing. And then I think once I left, then it was I just fully went into it and started producing my songs. I think that's when the real kind of learning happens, when you actually finish one of your songs from start to finish. You learn a huge amount.
It's such an interesting concept that you had, and it's interesting to hear you say, initially you were maybe a little scared to go out on your own and try that.
Terrified, yeah. I still am a little bit, to be honest.
Well, you don't need to be. It's great. So I guess I'm wondering, was there a moment, or was there anything that pushed you to go and do that when you did have that fear before? What was the turning point for you where you just kind of went, no, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna see what happens?
Yeah, I've been kind of trying to have a bit more of a role in previous bands in both Rofi James and SpyFu as a songwriter, but I'd always joined as the newest member. So you kind of I think people develop like a kind of a system for writing songs. So up until that point, I hadn't really fallen into the system, I guess, in any band that I've been in. So I wasn't really getting the opportunity to actually write. So there was an element of like, I have to be songwriting was my thing. I was like, I have to be in a band where I'm songwriting. And then when I left that was the main reason for leaving. I was just like, I have to be writing, so I'm going to set up my own thing. And when I set it up, set up my own thing. I did not intend on it being on my own. I actually initially I was looking for another singer, because I definitely did not like, I always in previous bands I was always kind of the keyboard player in the background, and was not I just wasn't comfortable with the idea of fronting a band at the time. I've gradually migrated into that role, but at the time I was absolutely avoidant of that. So I was looking for a singer, and I actually went through a few people where we kind of set up the band, and then a few people left here and there, and it dragged on for about a year, I'd say, where I was going from member to member, and I'd nearly have the band set up, and then somebody would leave, and it was just extremely frustrating. And then I got to a point where it's like the frustration drove me to actually being like, okay, look, I may as well just sing the songs myself. And that's how it started. It's kind of funny, like, because I never saw myself being in that lead role, but I ended up doing it because there was no other option, and it's kind of been the best thing that ever happened to me, I'd say.
Yeah, it's weird how things happen like that, I always find. And you know, you're doing so well at the moment, so it definitely paid off that those things were happening, and then it kind of forced you to go that direction.
Yeah.
I love your name, Stepping on Lego. Can you tell me how you came
Yeah.
up with that?
Yeah, it's a nice story, actually. When I was an intern in Galway, I was living with a guy who was really into music, and I was trying to set this up, and we just we were good just out for a drink one night in a bar that has loads of board games. So we were playing, like, I think we were playing Jenga in this bar, and I was trying to get the band name, and Will he was throwing out like all these mad names of toys. I think the Jenga Boys was one of them. That would have been very good. It might have had some copyright issues, but I think there was a few kind of toys related band names, and then Stefan and Lego came out of that.
That's amazing. And so you spoke a little bit as well earlier about, you know, I guess the more businessy side of things and kind of all the logistics that go into curating a brand for yourself, I guess, within the music industry, which some people, you know, forget exist altogether. They think, you know, you just pitch up, play your music, and that's it. You know, you made it. So can you tell me a little bit about some of the big challenges you faced in getting yourself off the ground and establishing that brand?
But I found the biggest challenge is that, like, and I'm sure you'll probably relate to this as well, is that, like, a lot of the times you just don't know how to do something.
Yeah.
You know, you're like, you know, like, you'd be like, how do I get my music on Spotify? Like, I'd never thought about that before, and you're there like constantly like googling things and googling like how to do things and the system behind it. It's so much easier now because I know how those things are done. But even, like, you know, getting songs registered for royalties, becoming a member of IMRO, and all those things that I didn't even know were things until I was a couple of months into it. It's just such a learning process. Like, there's so many things that you don't know how to do, and then there's so many other things that you haven't even realized you don't know how to do them yet because you haven't come across them. That was the biggest challenge, and I know all the kind of, there's a lot of technology that goes along with that as well, like getting set up with different companies and royalties and all that kind of crack. That was just a very, very like, it was just a bit crazy, I think, when I started. And then you have to get a website set up as well. That took a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it was almost like it's you kind of you almost don't get time to actually play music when you're doing all that stuff. And I've kind of found in the last 6 months or so that, because that stuff is kind of done now, that and I'm getting a bit more efficient with my producing over the past couple of months, and I've really found that, like, I'm able to actually relax and sit into producing a little bit more, whereas before I felt like I was always getting distracted by the business side of things. It's definitely a really tricky challenge for people. I can totally see as well, like, bands get turned off the whole idea by that kind of stuff when you're setting up on your own. I can totally see how they do, but I think that was probably the biggest challenge, just trying to figure out how to do all these random things I would have never done before.
Yeah, I can relate to you on so many levels with that. There's so much extra things you didn't even know existed. But no,
Yeah,
it's great to hear that, you kind of got all of that stuff out of the way, so you can really focus on the music at the moment, which must be such a nice feeling. Um,
yeah,
but you touched on the last 6 months there, and we're not forgetting you're a doctor too. So obviously you've been battling, the world's favorite word, COVID, at the moment,
yeah.
alongside trying to make a real go at your music as well. How has that been for you?
Yeah, it's actually been okay. Um, I think it's been okay because uh, I so like I when I previously had a lot of exams, especially before going to America. So that was the main challenge at the time for getting time to do music. But so I moved over to Minnesota in January. I was meant to work there for 6 months, and I was actually working like kind of extreme enough hours over there. Like I was working 70 to 80 hour weeks every week
Oh my
when I
God.
was there. So I wasn't getting much music done there. Um, when this all kind of kicked off early March, and we came home from Minnesota, myself and my other my housemate was also working over there, so we both came home to work in Galway. And at the time, it was like I think that was when everything was really bad in Italy, and we had loads of staff, and we very much were trying to keep keep things in a situation where you weren't getting too fatigued at work, just in case, in case people had to go off work because they were close contacts and all those kind of logistical issues. So they had deliberately, like, we were kind of set at like a 39-hour working week, in case things would take off and we'd be asked to work extra shifts. So came home after working like 80-hour weeks in America, and I was working 39-hour weeks here, and actually had a little bit more time on my hands than I expected. I think there's been a real effort as well to keep us kind of working a little bit more normal hours. So that's actually stayed like that since I've come home.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, because I think we just automatically assume, with, I guess, like the chaos of the whole thing, that
Yeah,
it'd be crazy all the time. But that's really nice to hear that they're properly looking after you guys and making sure you can still live a human life, and they're not just
oh,
treating you like
totally. Yeah,
robots.
yeah, they totally are. In fairness, I think they was like everyone was terrified. I think looking back to February and March, like we were all absolutely terrified about what was coming. Um, but thankfully, it has been manageable.
So I guess as well, you're a creative person, and we all go through times when, especially, I don't know if you found it during lockdown, but sometimes inspiration would not be hitting because you'd be in the same four walls of your house the whole time. Um,
Yeah.
so do you ever struggle with like a creative block, I guess, and how do you get out of that, and how do you pull influences from different things for your music?
Yeah, I definitely do. And it's funny because it comes at like different stages of the process. Like, because I find that music these days is very much it's very producer heavy. It's very like what separates songwriting a lot these days is the production, um, in a lot of ways, and that's often where I find a bit of a block, for definite. I think when I'm in a production and I can't I just can't get like a specific direction where I'm going with something. Generally, I don't usually have um, problems with the songwriting process itself, and I'm not really sure why, but I think it's because I spend so much time producing, like, on the computer, in like the depths of a song, that the songwriting is almost like a break from that. So I've always found that a little bit freer, and it kind of just happens a little bit more naturally. But I definitely find, being in the middle, getting through production, you do get little blocks along the way. Um, Something that I actually find that helps is giving myself a deadline. So if I book into the
Mm.
studio to do like I record all my vocals in a studio because I don't have the equipment. And it's also great to actually go into a studio to get it to bounce ideas and stuff. So I kind of like doing that. But The way I've been working it is that if I have a studio date, I try to get the production done beforehand and have it ready. And creating that deadline is very, very valuable.
Do you have, I know you can't predict the future, you can't, look into the next few years, but
Yeah.
do you have maybe a plan or a vision of what you would like stepping on Lego to do or to achieve in that time?
Yes. I think short term, the main thing is to start getting some festivals.
Oh,
Definitely, that's the big aim at the moment. So the single has probably it's done a lot more. Like, it's only out a couple of days, but it's definitely gotten a little bit more traction than previous ones. So I'm hoping to maybe get a little bit more like radio play and potentially get some festivals. That's definitely the big short term goal. Um, Over the next couple of years. So I think my long term view on stepping on Lego, once the brand, I guess, has been created and people know about it, is I'd love to get into composing for TV and film.
oh, cool.
So that's something that's in the back of my mind. Like, I like producing pop songs and gigging them, so I'm going to keep doing that. But once I kind of, over the next couple of years, if I do get more established from, like doing, like selling my pop music, if I'm becoming more established from that point, I'd like to use the brand of Stefan Lego as a platform to move into scoring for TV and film. That would be something I'd love to do.
Throughout your both, I guess, your medical career and your music, you've definitely experienced a lot of success, I would say, from listening to your story so far. So do you have a personal definition of what success means to you?
So when it comes to music, in particular, I would probably describe success as just having people come into your shows. That's always been the thing that I've just aspired for. I'm not necessarily. I don't necessarily think that I've got there, to be honest. But I just wanted to be in a situation where I could advertise a gig, and I'd have enough of a following that I would get some people come into a small venue to listen to me play my songs. That'd be my thinking on where I'd mark success. I don't see it as, as doing an arena tour or anything, like just a small venue where people actually listen to your music and would like to come to see you play. That'd be what I consider success.
So I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to let you get on with your day. If I put your 10-year-old self in front of you now today, having been through everything you've been through, both with music, with medicine, and in life in general, what's the biggest piece of advice you'd give that 10-year-old self moving forward in life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say to probably just to go for it. I think, because that's probably my biggest. I mean, I don't know if I call it a regret, but that's probably has been my biggest downfall, I guess, over the years when I was younger. That'd be the biggest bit of advice: just to go for it and not let yourself overthink things and limit yourself. Because I think that I definitely delayed starting this whole thing because I was too, scared of the prospect of doing it, I guess. So if I was to go back and be a 10-year-old all over again, I think that's what I'd do. I'd just, I'd encourage myself to have a bit more confidence and just go for it and stop overthinking things and hesitating.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And I think, we could all take that advice every once in a while in our lives, because it is one of the biggest things people struggle with, I think, is overthinking and having the confidence to go and actually do what you want to do, especially if it's something, in the creative industry, a little bit out of the box. It does take that extra step to have faith in yourself when everyone around you could be like, is this not a bit of a pipe dream? Are you sure?
Yeah, and you're leaving yourself. You're putting yourself out there to be critiqued as well, aren't you? Like, and it's not something that's not something that anyone likes. It's weird, like, because and I'm sure you probably relate to this as well, but when you start doing something, you kind of drip feed people a little bit. Like you'll do something and you'll see how people react to it, and then the next time
Yeah.
you'll do a little bit more, and then people are positive about that, and then the next time you eventually it'll get to a point where you just fully go for it. But there is an element of kind of grading yourself of what you're doing to people to see how they react to push you going forward.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story today, and all of your insights and your little bits of wisdom. It's been so interesting chatting to you, and I really appreciate you giving up your time.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please rate, share, and leave a comment if you like what you hear. And don't forget to follow @WhatIt'sLikePod on Instagram and Facebook. To find out more about Conor and to listen to his latest music, visit the links in the show notes. I'll be back next week with more inspiring stories, but for now, this has been What It's Like with Luce.